What school won't tell you. Lesson 10. The creation energy. Hello guys! In past lessons, we have often talked about the creation or the creation universal consciousness. But what is this creation energy, and what is the creation life energy? Today, we want to discuss this important topic in more detail. The creation energy is a purely creative energy of immense power through which the human being is enlivened, as is every other life form. From the smallest microbe to the mightiest animal and plant growth, thus encompassing the entire fauna and flora and all waters. The creation energy, which in a direct way has nothing to do with the personality and the consciousness of the human being or other life forms, corresponds to a pure energy and power of creational existence that originates directly from the creation universal consciousness, and is therefore also connected with its entire energy and power to all life. The personality and the consciousness of the human being, this must now be explained, therefore have nothing directly to do with the creation energy, but solely with the creation life energy, which, through its consciousness and subconscious, activates the material consciousness and subconscious of the brain. This is because the two material factors arise directly in the human being, that is, in his brain mass itself. Thus, they are material and physical, but are only activated through the creation life energy. And it should be explained once again in this regard. The creation energy itself does not create the personality and the brain's own material consciousness, but these arise in the body of the new human being, specifically in his brain. However, these forms, that is to say the arranged factors personality and consciousness, are brought to life solely through the creation energy, although they are only brought into effective activity and function through the associated creation life energy. For this reason, the creation energy is spoken of as belonging together with the personality and the consciousness, because only through it would individuality and reflection otherwise remain without driving force if the activation of the creation energy were absent. This is the effective reason why it is often said that this energy, together with personality and consciousness, enters the new human being on the 21st day after conception. The creation energy and the creation life energy together always form a unity, because only together do they, through their energy and power, constitute the factor that life can come into being at all and exist in an evolving manner. This has not been explained until now in the teaching of creation, because in the teaching of creation energy, it was first necessary for the learning human being to become clearly and consciously aware that in every case, only through the clear and powerful creation energy can all life come into existence at all. Not only human beings, human-like beings, and human-different beings, but also all life forms of fauna and flora, of land, air, and water. More precisely stated and explained, it is such that on the one hand, there is the pure creation energy, which enlivens everything, including the human being, while alongside it there is the creation life energy, through which the actual personality and the consciousness are first brought into effective function. Thus, it is to be understood exactly and correctly that in the human being there fundamentally operate two forms of creation energies. First, the pure creation energy, which enlivens the human body, the animating creation energy, as it also universally enlivens all existence of everything that exists, from the smallest to the greatest. To this, however, belongs the second form, namely the creation life energy, which together with the pure creation energy, on the 21st day after conception, activates the becoming of the evolution of a new human being, and gives him consciousness and personality in function. Therefore, absolutely and solely the creation life energy is the evolutionary factor of the human being. However, together with it, the pure creation energy is the multiplier and the actual energy that drives and maintains life, as well as the function of the formed body. This is while it carries within itself the creation life energy, which forms the factor that enlivens the consciousness with evolutionary energy and might, and likewise the personality, which the human being, however, shapes and forms in its actions and behavior entirely according to his own discretion. In the same way, everything also applies to animals, creatures, and all other forms of life, namely that they are enlivened together by the pure creation energy and the creation life energy, and thereby become capable of independent impulse life or instinct life. If we now continue to speak of the human being, which is the focus here, namely the completely new human being who is born and enlivened by creation energy, and who also becomes capable of evolution through the creation life energy, through which already many previous personalities have been enlivened, and whose consciousness and personality were able to evolve, then nevertheless, the newborn human being is completely neutral and free from any memory or other things of previous personalities and their consciousness. The previously lived personalities, which always and without exception were enlivened by the same creation energy and guided in evolution by the same creation life energy, and which now also enliven and activate the newly born human being, that is, his absolutely new personality and its consciousness, through their energy and might, do not exert any known memories upon the human being of the previous lives of those human beings or their personalities and consciousness. Thus, the new human being is in no way a rebirth of a previously lived personality, because no human being is reborn, but each new personality is only enlivened by the preceding and newly processed creation energy, as well as the likewise preceding creation life energy, which, after death in its creation energy realm, processes all the previously acquired knowledge of the personality. Thereafter, just as with the pure creation energy that enlivens the human body, the creation life energy, which has become capable of further evolution, transitions from a state of rest into activating a new personality and its consciousness. Namely, at the same moment when the pure creation energy also enters and thereby enlivens the new human body. This body, after a certain lifetime, through death, transitions into the so-called realm of the dead, or realm of the other world, which in reality is the pool of the total creation energy realm. That is, the domain in which the creation energy as well as the creation life energy remain in their storage domain for as long as necessary until the evolutionary processing process and the entire storage process of the knowledge absorbed by the human consciousness have been completed. Thereafter, both forms, creation energy and creation life energy, again pass into the fetus of a newly conceived human being, namely on the 21st day after conception, in order to enter into it, to enliven it, and to stimulate its consciousness and personality toward evolution, whereby the new human being already lives and becomes active in the mother's womb, in order, as a rule, to be born after 266 days or 36 weeks after conception. When the human being dies, the same process occurs again after death with the creation energy and the creation life energy, which deposit themselves in their respective realms for some time, whereby the creation life energy processes the accumulated knowledge of the previous life, in order then, together with the creation energy, to again be available for a new personality. Thus, after some time, years, hundreds, or thousands of years depending, the two forms of creation energy are again fully present in a new human being, that is, in his body, personality, and consciousness. And indeed, without any recollection of the previous life or the personality of the human being who was enlivened by the pure creation energy and who evolved further through the creation life energy. And this occurs each time without any predetermination, because with regard to the personality and its consciousness, there is effectively no connection back to the previous life and its personality and its consciousness. If now a so-called determination exists, which the human being follows in his present life, such as, for example, that he pursues a certain ability, develops certain interests, devotes himself to a specific teaching, carries out a particular activity, or represents a certain way of thinking, etc., then this is never based on a predetermination from a previous life or from the last life of a lived personality, but rather on the fact that the human being, during his current life, determines for himself through his own efforts, consciously or unconsciously, what he wants to be or become, and what he wants to create, or how he wants to live. As a consequence of the fact that the human being has, since time immemorial, been filled up with false teachings, beliefs regarding alleged rebirth, conspiracy theories, religious misinterpretations, ghost stories, and esoteric fables, etc., and continues to be indoctrinated, influenced, and deceived throughout life, so much erroneous thinking has accumulated within him that he has become, in all things, a slave of belief to all-encompassing deceptions, misguidance, and many lies. Therefore, it is absolutely necessary for the human being that what has been explained so far is truly understood. Consequently, it must be repeated once again in other words and explained again in a different presentation, namely as follows. With all the evolved knowledge which has been stored over millions of years through the countless lives of humans or their consciousness of the creation of life energy, this is the non plus ultra of the entire, what actually represents the human being with regard to knowledge. But people are usually not aware of this because they have no memory of which people or human personalities, as well as blocks of consciousness, were previously enlivened and activated by their creation life energy. This happens because this energy functions purely evolutionarily and only stores knowledge that it absorbs dynamically, without any memory associated with it that would emerge again in the next new personality. Unfortunately, humans cannot consciously call up unconscious knowledge, and that is not because, on the one hand, they are not capable of it, and on the other hand, because this is absolutely impossible for them, because in their coarse materiality, they can never penetrate into the area of the creation life energy, and thus also cannot penetrate into their unconscious of consciousness. They are only able to do this in the part of the unconscious of their material consciousness, which forms in the brain of humans with the help of the creation life energetic consciousness, which then also serves them as a memory storage, which they are able to use according to their ability and according to their own ability of his memory competence or ability to remember. Humans, as material living beings, will always remain denied in their material state any way or possibility of moving into the realm of the vastness of their creation life energy in order to search through it and therefore consciously filter out something stored in it. All the insane assertions of any saints or other religious, mental, and meditative greats who are supposedly able to do this reflect nothing other than a passion for lies and deceit or self-deceit and delusion, and they have fallen into these. Consequently, such statements are neither to be taken seriously, nor are they otherwise worth thinking about. However, there is the rare possibility that a life only ends for a short time, or that a person's personality and body die, and that the creation life energy only lingers for an extremely short time in the creation energy realm before it enlivens again a foreign or possibly the same personality, which has partial memory of the former personality. But why and how this happens, which is in fact less than extremely rare, cannot be explained, since the reasons for it are unknown. The fact is that this is extremely rare and inexplicable. It is normal that a person cannot remember any of the previous lives of a personality and its respective creation life energetic consciousness. Thus, no one can ever become aware of a life of a previous personality or be able to remember it in any way. Either what a personality has actually experienced through the creation energy or what has been learned through the evolutionary creation life energy. The evolutionary creation life energy, which always activates the consciousness of the personality in an evolutionary manner and also brings it into existence, has in its subconscious, in an extensive way, all the acquired knowledge of all lived personalities, and indeed up to the first personality development and the first function of consciousness. But this consciousness, and this needs to be explained again, is not to be equated with the material consciousness of a human being, which also contains a subconscious and therefore also memory storage. From the unconscious of the consciousness of the creation life energy, the human being receives only subconsciously and purely impulsively, fully evolutionarily processed, as well as stored information. This stands in contrast to the knowledge of the material consciousness of the human being, which is created through thoughts, etc., and functions in a conscious manner, and also releases stored information again in a conscious way. This is therefore in contrast to the creation life energy consciousness, for it never releases a memory of knowledge in such a way that it would somehow become clearly conscious to the human being. Only through the creation life energetic unconscious is something released impulsively. However, absolutely only subconsciously impulsively, which is stored from the processing results of the knowledge of previously lived personalities, which the human being, when he becomes clearly aware of the unconscious impulses through reason, can use for further evolution or for new insights and for the creation of knowledge. If the human being therefore develops into something very specific in life, or becomes interested in something, if it is not pre-programmed before birth by his prefrontal cortex, and he acts accordingly in life, then this is possible through two specific factors. First, the human being can orient himself according to the impulses coming to him from the creation life energetic unconscious, if he effectively perceives these unconsciously and interprets them correctly through reason. However, as stated, they affect him exclusively in an energetic way, which he never consciously perceives. Therefore, it must again be said that everything occurs from the unconscious of the creation life energy, without the human being being able to consciously perceive it. Consequently leading him to develop an interest in a specific matter himself and to turn to it more and more, and in practical terms, to determine everything himself in the current life and to devote himself to it. However, this determination, which he takes up as a result of the completely unconscious impulses from the unconscious of the consciousness of his creation life energy, and makes it part of his life's content, does not originate from a previous life of a former personality. Rather, he works out this determination himself in the present current life. This occurs, for example, in the form that he determines to take up an apprenticeship or a teaching which may already have been taken up and pursued by a previous personality 6 or 7 life phases earlier through the evolutionary creation life energy, but which is now taken up by the completely new personality and its consciousness through the imperceptibly arising energy impulses from the realm of the creation life energy, simply because the time has come for a further development of consciousness to occur. In this way, the human being creates for himself a determination for something that he will do and fulfill. However, never in the form that it would be a determination of a rebirth of a former matter or personality. Basically, the human being creates for himself in the course of his life what he calls a determination, and foolishly assumes that he is continuing what he did in his last life. But this does not exist, because what he does with a completely new personality and also a completely new consciousness both of which are enlivened only by the creation energy and activated by the evolutionary creation life energy. He determines by consciously striving for his corresponding interest and continuously learning, in order then to turn to that which corresponds to all his interests in the current life and only to his own corresponding self-determination. And it should again be explained in this regard that there is no destiny from a previous life, but that every interest and every determination of a human being is created in his current life and then becomes effective and actual. And second, every human being can also create a determination simply by allowing himself to be carried along by the possibilities of life and by consciously or unconsciously acquiring this or that ability, thereby creating a determination which he practices throughout his existence for life or carries out temporarily. The creation life energy, unlike the personality and the consciousness of the human being, is absolutely immortal through its own energy and power, and is set in continued existence, namely until in the farthest future a re-merging with creation itself, the universal consciousness, occurs with the immeasurable pool of the eternal total creation energy. In contrast to it, the activities, energies, and power of the human being, and thus of the personality and its material consciousness, are technically and electronically measurable. The sublime nature of the creation life energy with its immeasurable evolutionary creative power, however, is not measurable. And in the human being, as well as in all other life forms regardless of genus and species, it is subject to the change of life and death, which is not the case for it itself, but rather its existence is endless. It is the energy and power that creates the personality of the human being and its consciousness through activity, just as the creation energy in pure form brings everything to life. Consequently, the creation life energy alone creates the knowledge that the human being generates through its energy and power via his consciousness, transfers it to its storage, absorbs it within itself, and thereby evolves and becomes ever more energy-rich and powerful, whereby everything is also transferred impulsively and unconsciously to the unconscious of the material consciousness of the human being, and he or she thereby evolves. Therefore, it is also said that the energy and power of the consciousness do not dissolve and never pass away. The creation life energy continuously gathers knowledge from the unconscious of the consciousness of the human being in an impulsive manner and cumulatively evolves it into wisdom, that is, into impulse-laden energy and power. Everything occurs in a way that is inherent only to the consciousness, for it arises purely in terms of impulse energy and has nothing to do with thoughts or thinking of the creation energy, because it works, that is, evolves, through the absorbed knowledge from the unconscious of the material consciousness in the form of a dynamic transformation into its own strong creative energy and power. In doing so, the creation life energy acts within itself in an energizing manner, which means that it expands the knowledge absorbed impulsively from the unconscious of the consciousness with its own energy and increases its energy level and its power. Now, regarding the German word Geist, which equates to the term spirit, that is, its original term, Geist, which originally absolutely does not go back to the universal proclaimer Nocedemian, it must still be explained that it is completely incorrect and does not express what it truly should. Fundamentally, it is absolutely only the creation energy that enlivens all life forms. Furthermore, from the evolutionary creation life energy arise the creation energetic consciousness and the unconscious. These ensure that the physical consciousness is activated, which is anchored in the human brain. The evolutionary creation life energy keeps both the physical consciousness and the unconscious active and ensures that they function throughout life. Additionally, it must be precisely understood that there is also the pure creation energy, which enlivens the material body and all its organs with energy and power, enabling it to live and exist at all. As recorded in the ancient storages of Nocedemian, where the meaning awakening can also be found. This has nothing to do with the fact that when, for example, on Earth there is falsely talk of creative Geist energy or Geist, this means absolutely nothing, because such a thing does not exist, but rather a creative awakening energy. From this, it is to be understood that creation is not creation Geist, nor can it be called creation universe Geist energy, because creation is at the same time the sevenfold universal existence, and thus the total energy and power of everything that exists. And therefore again the factor of awakening or creating, namely through the power, vibrations, and impulses of its own energy. Therefore, the incorrect terms Geist and Geist energy can never be understood, for only the traditional terms creation life energy and pure creation energy are absolutely correct. These are traced back to the records of the proclaimer Nocedemian, who lived around 9 billion years ago, explored and taught the truth of his teaching, which has been preserved among the Plejaren and their federation to this day, and is taught throughout the federation. This ancient term, Geist, has therefore not existed and endured for millions of years, nor has it been brought from the expanses of the universe, but rather it arose in ancient times in an earth language, was adopted from it, and later distorted into the term Geist. The true and real background of the origin of the word Geist and its derivation is therefore, in truth, the original term Geist, which, according to present-day understanding in the German language, has the meaning and definition of the thinking consciousness of the human being, intellect, and subjective inner nature. And this has the same meaning in other earth languages as well. Due to the inability of human beings at the time of Emmanuel, incorrectly called Jesus Christ, to understand many terms such as personality, consciousness, and various others, the modern human being invented and used the widespread but completely incorrect term Geist, which has been preserved to this day and creates enormous misunderstanding and confusion. It must become clear to humans of Earth that the term Geist does not correspond to correctness and does not express what truly is. However, due to misguidance and lack of understanding, humans will not anytime soon use the correct term creation life energy and will continue for a long time to use the incorrect term Geist. Consequently, many misunderstandings will continue to arise in this regard, which will only very slowly and gradually be eradicated. Thus, up to now, there was no choice but to explain the values of the teaching of the proclaimers. That is, the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life, as it is truly called, as well as the meaning and value of prayers, using the term Geist, as it has been used up to now. Therefore, the following should still be said in this regard. The prayers, it must be explicitly explained here, are in their value not and never directed to a god, saint, or angel, etc., but in their entirety solely to the respective human being himself who speaks them in thoughts or aloud. Prescribed prayers, although of course one can compose, think, and speak one's own prayers, are always to be applied and directed in such a way that they are thought to be effective for one's own person. With such prayers, it is also possible that they have a calming and effective influence in terms of vibrations and sound on fellow human beings who themselves cannot perform such a prayer, but to whom such a prayer is spoken. Since, in earlier times, human beings used and understood the term Geist as that which occurs and is done through consciousness, namely that thoughts are cultivated, actions and ideas are conceived and carried out, inventions are made, poems are composed, and writings are conceived and created, etc. It resulted that, with the word Geist, everything was misunderstood and is still misunderstood today that should in fact be correctly understood. This is because it promoted belief in a delusion of God and spread it very quickly worldwide, and today it functions in every form as a non plus ultra of every religious false teaching and is cultivated as such. And exactly this is still the case today among the unknowing human beings of Earth. Consequently, the term Geist is still understood in the old false sense as that which is wrongly carried out through consciousness in every respect, whereas in truth, this is enlivened solely by the creation energy and enabled to be active by the creation life energy. In truth, therefore, it is as stated, never and in no way has a traditional God or spirit or divine spirit enlivened the consciousness of the human being or been the decisive factor for everything as a whole, such as for thoughts, ideas, inventions, actions, and ways of life, etc. But solely and effectively only the creation energy and creation life energy, because only these two energies alone are oriented in such a way that consciousness can be active and capable of thinking. However, that in ancient times, instead of the term creation energy and creation life energy, the incorrect and religiously invented expression Geist was used for consciousness and its activity, and is still wrongly used today, did not and does not in itself constitute an obstacle, because the so-called creative spirit, respectively the creative spirit form, is not addressed by the human being. And this is still not the case today when believers in a delusion of God idolize the spirit, and thus something non-existent. Therefore, it is essentially irrelevant whether this occurs in a simple self-communicative form or in regard to a prescribed prayer in expressive devotion, silently or spoken in humility in a terrestrial human sense, because the word Geist has no meaning, only the religious delusion of belief in an imaginary God, because the human being, through belief, does not think in accordance with reality and truth, but only falls into pseudo-thinking. What consciousness fundamentally is, the active thinking and doing of what the human being hopes for, this he begs for through his religiously misguided behavior from an alleged spirit and an imaginary God, whereas in reality, he fulfills it himself through his own activity. The human being effectively creates everything himself and sets for himself a guideline through which he achieves something specific, which he, in his confused belief, begs from his imaginary God. Although everything he hopes for from this non-existent God, who never existed, does not exist now, and will never exist, leads in its fulfillment back to his own independent effort and activity. In truth, it is always that which the human being himself does or will do, because he himself does what is right and arranges everything himself, for which only he alone is capable, in every case and absolutely without exception, never a heavenly spirit or any other spirit, nor any kind of imaginary God. Rather, the human being alone is in truth always enlivened solely by the creation energy and activated in his consciousness by the creation life energy, whereby he is given the possibility of his own activity. This is so that he does not erroneously and foolishly beg something from a non-existent spirit or God, which were never capable of existence and never will be. Everything functions only in this way, namely because under the false terms Geist and God, something completely incorrect is understood, and a delusional belief is cultivated, whereas the consciousness should fundamentally understand this if it were to think reasonably and thoroughly in accordance with reality and its truth. However, this is precisely what the Earth human does not do, because he generally cultivates only a believing pseudo-thinking. For in the fundamental aspect of thinking, all of this is unknown and not conscious to him, because he is subservient to religions and has fallen into belief. Moreover, as a result of this severe misunderstanding, it is also the case, without the human being noticing or knowing, that by addressing the imaginary spirit and the imaginary God, the consciousness is automatically addressed in a confused and erroneous manner and led astray. This forms a direct, confused, and energetically harmful connection between the term Geist and the material consciousness, which in truth originally could only arise through the creation life energy, but is misused by the human being through his delusional belief and turned into a block of misguidance and confused thinking. The whole corresponds to a fine material electromagnetic energy that keeps the human consciousness functioning in a belief-based and therefore false manner. The seat of the creative human creation life energy is located in the roof of the midbrain, in the paired nodal point, the so-called superior colliculus, whereby the creation energy is the factor that enlivens the entire body, while the activation of the personality block and the consciousness is achieved by the creation life energy. The pure creation energy is delicately distributed in and over the entire body, and thus also over every organ and within every organ. As such a factor, the creation energy does not carry out ideas or thought processes, but is only animating. In contrast, the pure creation life energy is evolutionarily active and guides the impulses of thinking, ideas, and imagination, etc., which belong solely to the subconscious of the material consciousness. Consequently, it corresponds to a harmful false teaching when speaking of intellectual property, etc. Because since the creation life energy is evolutionarily activating and does not itself develop ideas, thoughts, or feelings, since only the material consciousness is capable of this, there can be no such thing as intellectual property, but only person-related consciousness property. Likewise, there can be absolutely no mental illness or mental confusion, etc., because in truth, no spirit exists, but only the creation energy that enlivens the body and the evolutionary creation life energy, which works in a creational human manner as a tiny part of the immense and powerful energy of the creation universal consciousness, which is emitted and is absolutely untouchable by the human being in every conceivable way. The material consciousness can be manipulated by the human being and can also be damaged through various factors such as accidents or illness, intellectual or reflective overload, or through alcohol, drugs, gases, or other environmental influences, etc. Consequently, very serious consciousness damage and consciousness-related illnesses can arise. However, it is never and in no way possible that spirit damage or spirit illnesses can occur or manifest, because no spirit of the human being exists, just as none exists in any other life form. If something can be influenced or damaged by the human being, then it is never through the creation energy or creation life energy, nor through a spirit, since such does not exist, but only because something is conceived through the consciousness, whereby consciously or unconsciously, or through illness or negligence, damage can be caused. The actual creation energy provides the human being solely with life energy and power of life, which cannot be influenced in any harmful way, because it is absolutely taboo for the human being, as for all other life forms, meaning uncontrollable, unsteerable, unmanipulable, and ungovernable. This stands in contrast to the material consciousness, which, if allowed, can be controlled, directed, manipulated, influenced, and governed by other human beings. This makes it absolutely possible for a human being to be persuaded or influenced and directed toward a foreign opinion, which is in any case always incorrect. Thus, a person's own opinion can be suppressed and replaced by another, leading him to suddenly turn to something different from what he previously pursued. This can occur through coercion, but especially through indoctrination among people who neglect their own ability to think, and, in particular, their own ability to reflect on matters, and who willingly adopt what is indoctrinated into them, consequently accepting it without any independent thinking and defending it as belief and supposed truth, despite its falsehood. This form of indoctrination usually occurs to the highest degree through the diversity of religious lies and religious deception, through which countless pseudo-thinkers and easily influenceable individuals, as well as those who do not think in terms of truth, the fickle, and many gullible people, quickly and carelessly submit to the lies and deception of irresponsible persuasion, recruitment of believers, and coercion into belief, and thus fall into the belief instilled in them. This also happens through indoctrinations carried out by sectarians, hateful individuals, self-aggrandizers, and others, who target gullible friends, acquaintances, and other people with numerous lies and malicious deception, overwhelming them with false truths until they believe the entire deception without examination and adopt and represent it as their own opinion. This continues until one day, through awakening reason and clear rationality, they realize that they have fallen for lies and deception. In this way, many people can easily be converted to religious belief, persuaded or, due to their gullibility or under coercion, indoctrinated into becoming believers or even religious fanatics, up to and including murder, as can also occur in military contexts or in other inhumane ways. Further information on this topic can be found in Billy's books and writings, as well as in the Creation Energy teaching letters. Subscribe to our channel for more interesting topics and click the bell if you want to be informed about our latest publications. See you in our next episode, when we will again share more interesting facts. What school won't tell you?